Hello and welcome to the Third Sector podcast. I'm Lucinda Rouse, and in this episode I'll be talking to the Chief Executive of the Dogs Trust, Owen Sharp. Dogs Trust were really keen to talk about their new strategy as they adapt to a changing world and all that's brought for dog welfare. But as you'll hear, we cover a lot more ground than that, including Owen's thoughts on why the charity has had such success with legacies and how expanding its international work is helping to keep revenues healthy. He also went into some detail about what he's learnt from the ongoing redundancy process at Dogs Trust and how he's found the move from men's health to animal welfare. We started by talking about the impact of a changing world on the charity and its priorities from the COVID pandemic onwards. Over to Owen.
Lots of the kind of anchor points of what we've had to deal with subsequently have come out of COVID because it changed the nature of dog ownership in the UK. It changed the demands on us as a rescue and a rehoming organisation. And then we went into a cost of living crisis off the back of it, which has absolutely changed the landscape again for the world of animal welfare and dog welfare and rehoming. So organisationally, we've had to move and change a lot in that time. The world around us has changed. As we all know, charity fundraising is tougher because the world is economically challenged. So change has been the constant theme, I think, in my nearly 6 years at Dogs Trust.
So you've been at Dogs Trust since 2019 and you've come to the charity from a completely different cause area.
Yes, that's right. I came to Dogs Trust from Movember. And I went to Movember from Prostate Cancer UK, which was a little bit of a seamless change because Prostate Cancer UK was such a big partner of Movember. So I came to the world of dog welfare from the world of men's health.
How have you found that transition?
It was really invigorating, very challenging, but a couple of times in my career I've moved sort of sectors within the charity world. So I started at victim support in the world of criminal justice and then moved into health and then across into animal welfare. In the end, so many of the issues are the same. The causes are around kind of social inequalities, pressures on people's lives. It just happens to affect dogs in the world of Dogs Trust, but many of the solutions are the same as well. I think what I've particularly found exciting and invigorating about Dogs Trust, it almost takes me right back to the start of my career, which was in the NHS. I started my professional life as a nurse and then was in management in the NHS. And Dogs Trust is quite an operational organisation. At any given point, we've got 2,000 odd dogs in our care. We've got 21 rehoming centres that are operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So it's quite an operational organisation. So it took me back to all of that. So there's so much to learn about the world of animal welfare, but a lot of the core issues are actually very similar.
We're here primarily to talk about Dogs Trust's new strategy.
Yes.
Could you give me a sort of high-level explanation of what you've been up to?
Of course. So we've been reviewing our strategy for a little while now, well over a year. We came to the conclusion that we needed to review our strategy because the world around us has changed so much and we have to keep constantly asking the question, are we having the biggest impact that we possibly can? Demand on our services has gone up hugely. There are real challenges in finding homes for dogs, and it's very clear that a big part of what we need to do needs to be starting with the question, how can we try and keep owners and dogs together whenever we can possibly do so? So all of those were kind of drivers for the strategy. And the outcome of that strategic review is that we've decided that it's really important for us to focus on activities that are going to increase our impact as an organisation, which essentially means rehoming more dogs. It means making sure that we have more direct focus of our prevention services to keep dogs and owners together. And it also means focusing our international work to have the biggest possible impact for that, with a particular emphasis on the elimination of canine rabies across the world, because it's a hugely significant disease. Not only does it affect dogs, it is responsible for the death of one person every 8 minutes somewhere in the world, but also it changes the relationship between people and dogs if you have rabies in a community. So all of that is something we've agreed with the board and we've rolled out. We are now in the process of implementing it, it has meant having to make some fairly significant changes. A number of our centres we've changed to become foster hubs. We put 300 staff at risk of redundancy, but the vast majority of the roles will be new roles in the organisation. So it's a big change process. We've been through a consultation at collective level, and we're now going through individual consultations so that we're increasing the staffing in some bits of the organisation, particularly in the rehoming centres, so that we've got higher staffing levels so that we can make sure we focus our resources in those places to get to the dogs that need them the most, as well as expanding our foster services to deal with more dogs in actual people's homes.
So thinking about these roles that you made redundant and then the creation of others, what new skills are you needing to bring into the charity to make sure that you can deliver on your strategy?
So there's not so much new skills. It is about different numbers of skills at different places. So fundamentally, we're talking about increasing the staffing at our rehoming centres that are going to operate 24 hours. So more staff to run it across the 7 days a week model that we need to do. It's particularly around making sure that our behaviour teams and our behaviour skills are in a place where they're easily accessible. So we, for example, had a service called Dog School that was training classes that were offered to all dog owners. We came to the view that we can actually shift quite a lot of the content of that to an online platform, and that we can work with other providers to provide that skill. The people who were involved in Dog School may well have opportunities to come and be part of our centre staff or be part of our online or telephone helpline. So I think most of the skills exist in the organisation. It's just different numbers. But what we are looking to do is really create a pathway as part of this change for people who start in maybe more junior roles to have an opportunity to travel through. So you might start as a canine carer, somebody who's just involved in direct kennel support, actually to pick up skills along the way. So we're looking as part of this to really increase the development pathways in the organisation, which is something our teams told us they were really looking for.
And there has been quite a significant reaction to the news of the restructuring, both internally and externally. There was a petition, I think, particularly around your Newbury rehoming centre, which had over 30,000 signatures of people opposing it. Were you expecting that kind of pushback?
I think probably the answer is yes, because we know how much people care about what Dogs Trust does. And I mean, the other thing to say is that it was a consultation, and sometimes not everybody believes that, but we did have some ideas. We put them into a consultation process that we did collectively. And as, for example, as a result of the feedback and the thinking that we got out of the consultation, we changed the proposal around Newbury, because originally the plan was to close Newbury, but we've decided that actually it's going to work better as a foster hub. And originally we thought it might be somewhere that would close because it's got relative proximity, close proximity to other rehoming centres, but actually we got a lot of feedback that it was going to work much better as a foster hub. So we did change things. So in many ways, this sounds glib, and I don't mean it to. It's almost pleasing that many people cared about the future of a rehoming centre. We genuinely listened. We got some really great ideas about collective consultation, and we did make some quite significant changes as a result of it. So it's a tough period, and it's quite hard during a collective consultation because lots of people have very specific questions, but the answer you have to give is, well, we're listening to all of the feedback. And sometimes you've got to be careful that you don't give answers that prejudice the collective consultation process, but it can seem like you're being a bit opaque in a process like that, which we genuinely weren't. We were really listening and did want to come up with the best model at the end of it. And I think the feedback that we got both internally and externally helped us to do that.
And how have you been working to sort of ensure internal buy-in to what you've been doing and these really quite significant changes?
I mean, the biggest thing that you do is just constantly try and communicate with everybody and to tell everyone what's happening. Obviously, it's a period of change and people are very concerned about roles and frightened about that change, and we fully understand that. I think the other thing I'd point to that I think was a really big part of this, and I think went well in a difficult circumstance is the employee forum that we really made as the sort of central point of connection between all of the staff and any of the ideas that were being fed back both to management and to the board. We established the employee forum last year because we were going through a process of incorporating or unincorporating the charity. Very technical change, but technically it actually meant that we had to change everyone's contract. So we wanted to involve the staff in that. And that worked very well. So we used that as the vehicle once we got into the consultation. And the employee forum did a fantastic job. They dealt with hundreds and hundreds of queries. They fed them through. They were very fair in their representation of all voices across the organisation, and I think played a very big part in it. So clearly we've got more change to do and more engagement, so you're never there, and I think there's a lot of communicating to keep doing, but having that employee forum voice in there as an independent voice that could represent all staff from across the whole organisation, I think was really helpful.
And is there anything that you and your fellow executive team have learned from this process and might perhaps change going forward in terms of how your culture is at Dogs Trust?
Yes, lots. And there are lots of good bits of feedback, both at a local and a kind of organisation-wide level. I think, firstly, the actual process of consultation and kind of understanding where people's concerns were had meant that we can just think about the questions that we might get asked and try and give those answers up front. Employee forum itself has demonstrated there's lots more potential to just think about that continued conversation around how we engage, we make people feel part of any changes and thinking going forward. I think the other piece around it that I've learned is that it's important to think about the wider voices in the process as well. So we probably didn't do a great enough job of talking to volunteers, for example, in some of the bits of the change. And I think we should definitely do more of that as we go forward and think about the changes. But there's been an awful lot to learn through the process, and it will influence how we do things going forward, because whilst really hope we don't have to make any more structural changes, these are structural changes that really increase our impact as an organisation, and that is going to mean evolving processes and ways of working. For me, the biggest thing was about really being clear why we're doing what we're doing, and that the detail of how we do it is secondary. It's important, but if we're really clear why we're making changes, and what everyone during this change was brilliant at doing was always seeing it through the lenses of the dogs. And I think that's the constant question that we need to be thinking about as we do things going forward.
I believe there was probably a bit of a disconnect between what you were envisaging and why you decided to undertake this restructure and potentially close the Newbury Centre and what people understood was happening on the outside in terms of, the shelter's closing and therefore the dogs aren't going to be looked after. How have you managed that communication with the outside world?
I mean, there's two bits of the outside world. There's the kind of the external partners that you work very directly with, and then there's the broader population. I think you realise that we are a national charity and we're a national organisation, but actually our centres or our services have a really, really strong local presence. So a lot of that engagement has been with local media, and that might be online media, or it might be sort of local newspapers or television or radio programs. So I think there's an importance around engaging those conversations and learning the lessons from that sometimes as a national charity you kind of give the rationale for all of your changes on a national basis or a global basis, but in truth people think about these things on a local basis. What does this mean for the dogs in this particular area versus this may be a big change that we're seeing as a whole organisation. So I think up front, not just thinking about changes through the lens of a national change, but a local change is probably the biggest single part of that.
And on the topic of resources, again around your strategy shift and your restructure, certainly we got the message loud and clear that this wasn't due to financial problems. It was very much how you can adapt the charity to be responding to the evolving needs of the day. How are you keeping your fundraising and your income streams healthy?
So it's a challenge. I think everyone who's involved in the world of charities knows that we're all having to work harder than ever for any pound and any income that we're raising. We're very lucky. We have an incredibly loyal donor base. We saw that through the pandemic. They stuck with us. But it's tough. And it's tough both in terms of raising the money and also you've just got an underlying cost base that's going up all the time. Legacy is a big part of what we do, and we are incredibly lucky with the scale of our legacy donations. They are a big part of what we've got, and they've held up very well during this time. So we're holding our own. We're doing well, and we're seeing still some growth in our income, but we're not complacent around that, and we're going to have to keep thinking around engaging, which is why things like the international work I think is quite important, because it's a different audience from a donor base that we can potentially engage going forward. So we're not looking to expand it for the sake of expanding it. It's got to have a clear impact and a clear outcome, but it does mean that we can reach people that we might previously have not reached. So we're constantly thinking about how we do make sure we've got a lot of innovation in our income streams.
And on innovation and thinking about your legacies, it can't just be down to luck that you're doing so well. Obviously, we are very much a dog-loving nation, yes. But how are you growing your legacy base? What do you think's working in that respect?
I think there are three things at play for that. I think the first thing of a strength of Dogs Trust, and I say this as somebody who's not responsible for it, the brand is very strong. And the underpinning of the brand is about the fun and the joy of owning, being with, having dogs in your life. That resonates with so many people. So the cause is kind of easy to sell because so many people care so much about dogs. Secondly, I think we articulate that in a way that the very fact that we're a bright yellow charity just has a positivity around it. And I think a lot of donors respond to that and engage really well with that part of it. So that's how we kind of keep going. In terms of the legacy space, I think there's a couple of aspects to that. One is we do a good job of engaging with people throughout their lifetime and the lifetime of their dogs. And for example, we have a product called the Canine Care Card, where we actually start a conversation with people who are a bit older, start to have concerns about dog ownership in case they're going to become ill or actually not be around to care for their dogs. Well, we start that conversation with them early on. And it's not a service we charge for. It's not a service that we assume that people will give us money, but people recognize the benefit of that. And then when they're coming to think about, their afterlife planning and their will and legacy planning, then we're often in the forefront of their mind because we've had that conversation with them. So I think there are benefits in having honest conversations with people around that and making sure that we do a good job of a combination of the big picture story of what Dogs Trust does, i.e. here's the number of dogs that we help every year, here's all the big problems, but also bringing it to life on an individual basis, because I think the storytelling and everyday events that happen in Dogs Trust about how we transform both dogs and people's lives keeps it very much in the forefront of people's minds.
Quite difficult sometimes to bring up death though.
It is, although I think we're more shy about it than people are often thinking about it. So as we said earlier on, I come from a health background, and I come from a men's health background where men are not very good at talking about anything. But actually, once you start the conversation, you find a way to get into it. It's almost about finding a way to initiate the conversation. Once you do, people do talk about these things. So for the idea, for example, so many people kind of get to a certain stage of life, they might lose their dog and say, well, I can't have another dog because I'm concerned I won't be around. Well, that's a way in to start that conversation, which is why the Canine Care Card is a great product, as well as offering a brilliant service.
Thinking about the charity sector more generally, beyond the animal welfare space, how do you see where we are today compared to perhaps 10 years ago?
It's a tough place to be, and I think so much of that is beyond the charity sector's control. I think there are things that maybe the sector could be thinking about a little bit differently, but we're in that dilemma that comes for those of the work in the charity sector, that when times are tough, it's more expensive and it's more difficult for us to run the organisation, and the need is even greater. And, Dogs Trust, as we've talked about, is a very lucky organisation in terms of the size and scale and the resilience of our donors, but our cost base has gone up. We have to work harder for the money that we raise, but the level of demand that we've seen going up is huge. It's at a level that really outstrips anything we've seen in our 130 plus year history. And that sounds like a hyperbole, but it's not. We took a number of calls that was just unprecedented last year, and we continue to do so in terms of people who need help, need to have their dogs rehomed. So it's a really busy time. We've had political change. There's not been very many constants over the last 10 years, and you can draw a line back to whether it's, Scottish referendums, Brexit, COVID, whatever it is. The world is not a very stable place at the moment. So we've had to adapt to that and constantly adapt to all of that. And in the UK, in the last 12 months, we've had a change of a political administration and a government that's a different party, so there's a different approach inevitably and all of that. So this constant change is always there. I think there's been a lot of curveballs that come along the way. The most obvious and prominent one has been the national insurance increase for employers, which hit a lot of charities very hard, both big and small. Doesn't help that those things come out of the blue. I think the sector's does well in supporting itself, but sometimes when things are tougher, there is a danger that it becomes more siloed and isolated, and people go into their kind of fighting for their resources and fighting for the coverage that they need to get. But actually, it's the time when we need to come together the most and have the most consistent and compelling voice that we possibly can, because that's the place where we can make the biggest difference and the biggest impact. So I like to think it's a cycle. I think the value of what the sector is doing has probably never been greater. I think it's hugely undervalued in terms of the difference that it's making. But I think we should be looking as a sector at opportunities to both increase the impact of what we do by thinking about better collaboration, mergers where they apply, but also to speak with a stronger voice, be it on a broad topic basis, on a more specific sector base.
Have you been involved with the Civil Society Covenant at all?
Yeah, so I've watched that with a great deal of interest and fed into some of the process. I would say I think it's a great start. Good to see recognition and a little bit of a reset of a relationship between the sector and government that's probably felt a little bit shaky over the last few years. I'm very supportive and positive about it. I think it's beholden on all parts now of that covenant to actually really start bringing it to life and making it meaningful. Dogs Trust, we don't get any government funding, but I still think we're providing a big part of a service to society. And I would hope, and I will say this with my Dogs Trust hat on, that the covenant doesn't lose sight of that. We are contributing and providing things that would not otherwise happen. And if we walked away from it, we're not going to walk away from it. Government will be left with a very big problem, both nationally and locally as well. And just because we don't provide it on the basis of a contract or some sort of resourcing arrangement, it doesn't mean it hasn't got huge significance. So I would hope that there's a sophistication to the covenant, that we do think about all aspects of this. And I hope there's some challenge both from the sector but to the sector about what would make it more meaningful for the other partners, particularly government partners in this, to get more out of the sector and make it more central to the thinking, as opposed to being seen as kind of specialist interest groups. There's so much more than special interest. This is an interface between so many parts of society that can be represented by the sector that I think government would do well to tap into that more.
But that would require the sector being proactive as well in terms of putting that offer out there.
Absolutely. And I think that's a challenge to us as a sector. I think we've got to take that on board. And without being pious about it, I think that's inherent in nearly all of our charitable objects. It's not just about being oppositions or being kind of protesting about things. It's about engaging in a way that has the best chances of us meeting our charitable purpose. And we should challenge, we should say when things are wrong, but we have to find ways to create solutions as well. And sometimes those solutions are us coming together and thinking together and thinking about the priorities as opposed to the biggest, longest list of everything that must happen, because there's a point where it just doesn't become realistic.
And there are so many reasons why the sector needs to come together and why organisations working in similar cause areas, but also quite different cause areas, need to be working together effectively. As you said earlier, there's often a tendency to go into silo when you're in survival mode, just trying desperately to get the amount of money that you need to deliver the services when the demand is going up and up and up. Would you be able to give me an example of a way that Dogs Trust is collaborating really well with another organisation and perhaps has made you work in a slightly different way to how you might have done if there hadn't been that partnership?
Yeah, I think there's a few. As I mentioned earlier, I think the pandemic taught us an awful lot. So at a leadership level, when the pandemic happened, a group of charity chief execs of the larger animal welfare charities started coming together on a weekly basis initially. And frankly, we did that just because we all needed a bit of support for one another, because it was a scary, tough time. And, you felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility to your organisation, both in terms of what it delivers and everyone who's part of it, be it a member of staff or a volunteer. And several of us quite early on realised that we were taking a lot on in that position, and you kind of felt a sense of having to be strong and having to know the answers to everything in a situation where nobody knew the answers to everything. So that started us jointly working together. And then it was at the same point at which we recognised there was real benefit in us talking with one voice around some of the priorities in the world of animal welfare. For example, at Dogs Trust, that meant we had to recognise the importance of causes that were linked to things that weren't just dogs. If you want to talk about animal welfare needs, there's no point me just talking about all the things that need to do for dogs when there was a massive issue around the need for microchipping in cats. Wasn't part of a legislative requirement. We'd seen the strength of that 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago in the world of dogs, and it made a huge difference. So we were very supportive and played a big part in that from a learning point of view. This is our experience of making microchipping mandatory in dog ownership, translate it into cat ownership. And that happened, and that we work very closely, particularly with Cats Protection, but also RSPCA and Blue Cross and organisations like that. So we've done a lot of that, and we've explored opportunities to do joint procurement together. Can we think about how we can leverage opportunities? So, for example, in our world, drug costs and veterinary costs are very big, and that's true for all animal welfare organisations. So we started to think about ways that we can work together within the bounds of competition law that are the ways that we can identify practice that support one another, and not repeating evaluations that, there's no point for organisations evaluating the best pathways for drug and prescribing. It'd be better for each organisation to do it for one and then share the findings from that. So there's things like that we've done along the way. And then the other thing that we've done is to try to work very closely with local organisations. So whilst, as I said, Dogs Trust, big national organisation, we have 21 rehoming centres, and they're the centres of community. So can we work with local animal welfare organisations to really help them deliver what they're trying to deliver, and vice versa? And then there's policy agendas, and probably the most striking example in the world of dog welfare recently has been the work around moving towards calling with one voice for the banning of greyhound racing, which we did through the Cut the Chase coalition that came together and most recently has seen success in Wales. And that was the bigger national organisations as well as local organisations, and really recognising that all of us not only wanted to just call for the ending of greyhound racing, but to think about how that would happen, and to be able to work with, in the case of Wales, Welsh Government, because it isn't just say, let's ban this. We recognise that if you're going to stop greyhound racing, you've got to make a transition from where it is today to where it needs to be tomorrow, not least the fact that there will be lots of racing greyhounds that will need to be given homes. So how would we do that in a planned way? And we continue to call for that across England, Scotland and Northern Ireland, but Wales has led the way on that. And I think the way that the charitable organisations work together is a big part of getting that over the line.
Going back to the start of our conversation, you've worked across multiple different charitable cause areas. You've been at Dogs Trust for 6 years now. What's next?
There is an awful lot to do. at Dogs Trust, underpinning the strategy is about kind of doubling the size of our impact, helping so many more dogs either directly through our care or stopping coming into our care. And you add into that the ambition around the international work. We can make rabies a disease of the past if we all come together and work across that. And I find that hugely exciting. It's going to need a lot of effort, and it's going to need to bring a lot of people to the party. So all of those things are massively exciting. I think the other challenge for me from a personal point of view is probably the things that I was saying earlier about how the sector can do more. I need to think about the part I can play in that. It's a sad fact of life that this is now my third or fourth, if you include interims, chief exec role in the charity sector. So I guess I'm an old hand. I guess I'm whatever the right word is. If you're being polite, you can call it an elder statesman of it all, but
highly experienced.
There you go. That's the one I was looking for. But that experience is probably important to share. So I'd like to think of myself helping new leaders coming into the sector, but also helping the sector to think about it. I think there is real benefit in having worked in several parts of the sector. As I said, health, national and local. So Movember was very much a global organisation. Prostate Cancer UK was obviously a national organisation, but being part of criminal justice and now part of animal welfare, there are real lessons to learn from all of those. And I think I'd like to play a bigger part in sharing that knowledge, but also being a voice outside of the sector into other parts of society to think about the difference that can be made and the learning that comes from it. So all of those things. And then I guess the other thing about working at Dogs Trust is what's next might be another dog adopted. So I so far have 2 that I've adopted, took one on in the last 6 months. So plenty of doggy interaction in life is always a big part of what you do at Dogs Trust as well. So I'm sticking at 2 at the moment, but you never know. There might be another one comes along the way.
Have you got any cats?
No, don't have any cats. I have had cats in the past. I do like cats. I certainly have one dog who likes cats, but in the wrong way. So cats would never be a possibility. She's a sight hound and she's got quite a strong prey drive. So Lexi and cats wouldn't mix in a household sense. But there's plenty of things to do in the world of dog welfare, but maybe there's some things that I can contribute across the wider sector.
Brilliant. Well, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you, Owen. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this discussion with Owen Sharp, and that's it for this episode. Next week, we'll be joined by the Chief Executive of the Duke of Edinburgh's Award, Ruth Marvel, to talk about the charity's approach to impact measurement. From all of us at Third Sector, thank you so much for listening. Our producer is Nav Pal.